We got our final thoughts on Iowa State before we turn our attention to Baylor. And the Oklahoma Sooners are all of a sudden projected to win 3 of their final 4 games. We'll talk about that and a few recruiting notes here on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. He's Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on 94.7 The Ref in Norman. Josh, just real quick before we start talking about our final thoughts on Iowa State, the Oklahoma women's soccer team won their quarterfinal match of 1-0 in a final minute with a final minute goal. They'll move on to the semifinals where they'll play TCU, the number 2 seed in the Big 12 tournament, trying to advance, maybe make some noise in the national title scene. So congrats to them. Keep chugging along. Good luck to you. I think it's the 3rd. So this Thursday night, they'll be playing down in Round Rock. So if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and able to get over to Round Rock, make sure you go check out the Oklahoma women's soccer team in the Big 12 tournament. Josh, Oklahoma beats Iowa State by 2 touchdowns. It's the largest margin of victory for any Big 12 team against the 0-5 in Big 12 play Iowa State Cyclones. So let's just kind of lay it all out on the line. The things we didn't get to yesterday, our final thoughts from the Sooners win on Saturday.
If we're tossing out awards for, non-Sooner football teams, congratulations, by the way, to Lindsey Gray-Walton in OU volleyball as well. That was a big win for them over Kansas as well. But to football, Iowa State, some final thoughts that, news and notes maybe of the game that we didn't touch on. It's my understanding that someone out there on the YouTube side is disappointed. They feel we did not, I guess, appropriately criticize one Marvin Mims. And is that correct?
Yeah, and I get it. Like, he didn't have a great game. I hear where they're coming from. It was a really bad game. 2 receptions on 6 targets, 2 drops. One that was pretty egregious and just not a Marvin Mims type game. I wrote a piece on it briefly over at Sooners Wire. It was the first time that he'd had 5 or more targets and 2 drops since his freshman year. It's the lowest yardage total he's had ever with 5 or more targets. So that kind of gives you a bit of context for how poor he played. At the same time, we've seen enough of Marvin Mims over 2.5 plus seasons to know, like, this is not indicative of the player that he is. This is an outlier. It's an aberration. Marvin Mims is going to be good. And I bet this game kind of fuels what we see coming up against Baylor.
Yeah, I would imagine so. It's the first bad game I think Marvin Mims has had in his whole career, John. So, freshman wide receivers we see come into a place like Oklahoma. We've seen it with, CeeDee Lamb. And do I think that Marvin Mims is necessarily going to have the same career professionally that CeeDee Lamb has had? No, I'm not ready to go there. But, Marvin Mims from day one, like a CeeDee Lamb, right? Like a Kenny Stills, has kind of been that rare breed that from the moment he arrived on campus was a difference maker, John. And so, look, I'm not going to rip the kid too much when he has a game where he has several drops. And by and large, every other game of his career has either been really, really good or it's been kind of a coaching staff error to not throw targets his way. So, to me, it's like, look, I get it. Marvin Mims did not play a great game in Ames, Iowa, but, I don't think that's about to just become this big trend with Marvin Mims. It clearly has not been his career. And look, I don't think it's anything to be super panicked over. If anything, the positive there is that Jaleel Farouk was able to help pick up the slack a little bit. But, if you want to take the pessimistic side on it, John, I guess we see the impacts offensively for Oklahoma when you have an off day for Marvin Mims. I mean, they still won the game. And as you pointed out, Iowa State's not lost really to anybody. I mean, to nobody this season by more than 1 score. And dating back the last couple of seasons, John, I'm looking at the schedule right now. The last time that before Saturday, Iowa State lost a game by more than 1 score was Louisiana its season opener in 2020. Then you go back to 2019 versus Notre Dame and Kansas State at the end of that season. So, and Iowa, I guess, the last season as well. But there's just not a lot of games in there where Iowa State loses by a couple of scores. So, look, if you want to nitpick and be upset about Marvin Mims, his one bad game, then yeah, by all means be upset. But I don't think it's anything to be concerned about.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to throw some criticism at him, but I feel like Jeff Lebby said it best. It's like we're not going to stop featuring him. We're going to continue to have confidence in the player that he is because he's always been a really good player. When he's gotten opportunities, he's been featured in the offense, he's performed. So it's a down game. You just write it off as a bad game and you just move on. That's just kind of the way it works. As someone who's played wide receiver, played sports, sometimes you just have bad games. No matter how good of a player you can be, you can have bad games from time to time. Staying on this front, another player who kind of underwhelmed a little bit on Saturday, Marcus Major, wasn't as good as what I would have hoped he would have been in his return, especially when Eric Gray averaged 5 yards per carry. I would have felt Marcus Major would perform a little bit better. Josh, just your thoughts on Marcus Major and his performance.
He got the bad totes, I guess, right? Eric Gray. And look, I'm saying that a little bit in jest. Obviously, Eric Gray has established himself here as the clear number one running back for Oklahoma. And right now, with Marcus Major, is it that the book's kind of been written on who Marcus Major is going to be at the University of Oklahoma to where he's a guy that fans were really excited about and saw some positive things from? Really, John, in some more meaningless moments, right? Not as important of snaps for Oklahoma over the course of his career. And or is this the product of, look, he wasn't fully back healthy, right? And is there still something else positive to come for Marcus Major? Because physically, I didn't see, and it's tough to say, right? I mean, he obviously has been working against the ankle injury, trying to come back from it. Javonte Barnes, we found out afterwards, is nursing himself back to health from a hamstring. So I wouldn't imagine that the medical staff would in any way, shape, or form rush Marcus Major back to have a second running back simply because he had Javonte Barnes not travel with the team with a hamstring injury. I would think, and I thought physically it looked like Marcus Major was back, right? That he was healthy and good to go. He got 12 carries in the game and just wasn't very good with them. So I hope that there's a little bit of a rust factor there, but I'm concerned maybe kind of total opposite, I guess, from what I said about Marvin Mims. It's like you kind of go off the track record that these players have, John. And really with Mims, you got a track record for one guy that's been a star. And for Marcus Major, you kind of have a track record for somebody that's throughout the course of his entire career been building to try and crack the rotation and kind of never really has yet.
Yeah, and then on a positive note, Billy Bowman came back, played 44 snaps for the Oklahoma Sooners, which I think is a great sign. You get him back for the stretch run, and I think it gives you your defense a lot more confidence in the back end. But, guys like Justin Broyles, Key Lawrence, they're starting to play better football as they've gotten more opportunities as well. Key Lawrence was the highest graded defender for the Oklahoma Sooners on Saturday. So that's huge for this team.
It is. Yeah, no, that's obviously great to see. Really the secondary across the board. So you get Bowman back. That alone is pivotal, right, for Oklahoma. Easy to make the argument that he's been the best defensive player for the Sooners so far this season. So getting him back, 40-some-odd snaps, that's great. But for Key Lawrence to be the highest graded, that's terrific news as well. Woody Washington, right? I thought set the tone in this game, John. The early interception, we can get into the replay element of it. I, like you, said it in yesterday's show. I'll say it again right now. I was shocked that it was upheld, that the play stood. But, hey, whatever, baby. It wound up as an interception, and it helped set the tone for the game. So you had those two that played well. Justin Broyles had an interception in this game. So really across the board in a game where Iowa State threw it 57 times, I thought kind of you got pretty good contributions collectively back there.
Yeah, and I think it was just a solid performance across the board. The defensive line, they just had the one sack, but I feel like they produced more pressure than what we've seen at times. It was more effective pressure where it made Hunter Dekkers uncomfortable. He wasn't, even when he wasn't being pressured, he wasn't necessarily comfortable back there. And I think that's what you're looking for, is even if you can't get there, you've got a quarterback that thinks you're going to get there, and then he's going to be rushed to throw. And so I think that's strong. So positive vibes, things moving forward. Yeah, we'd like to see Marvin Mims play better. We'd like to see Marcus Major play better. And I think we will. We will see them play better. Now, this week against Baylor, it's going to be a tough matchup, especially against a defensive front that's really, really good. But we're looking at another winnable game for the Oklahoma Sooners. If a few things go right, we'll start talking about Baylor coming up next. We'll look at some projections from ESPN's matchup predictor for the rest of the schedule as well.
Yeah, the matchup predictor all of a sudden may be kind for Oklahoma. And speaking of being kind for Oklahoma, this week's thrilling moment in college football, in Sooner football, it's brought to us by Nissan. The thrilling designs behind the new lineup from Nissan, they're intended to empower drivers and vehicles as capable as the driver themselves. And when I think of unbelievable abilities on the football field for this week's thrilling moment, it has to be John, a no-brainer, right? It has to be the two-part tandem, Turk and Schmidt, the fake for Oklahoma, easily the most thrilling moment of the game for Sooner fans. Yes, Jalil Farouk later, big score. Danny Stutzman, nice little argument there on one that came right into the breadbasket, baby. But the fake, man, was so well executed by Oklahoma. And really, who knows how the game plays out versus Iowa State if you don't get it, right? But give Brent Venables, give Oklahoma credit. They made the call. It worked beautifully. It was executed perfectly from Turk to Schmidt to caving aside it and just walking right into the end zone. So this segment, it's been inspired by the thrilling new designs featured across Nissan's new lineup of vehicles. Pursue what thrills you, ladies and gentlemen, in the all-new Frontier, Armada, or Pathfinder today, available now at nissanusa.com. So the forecast for Oklahoma, dare I say, leaving the Cotton Bowl, John, and maybe this is, speaking of being kind, speaking of being polite, this is probably too polite, but it was a little cloudy for Oklahoma leaving the Cotton Bowl. If you start looking at ESPN's FPI and some of their matchup predictor indexes, that forecast has softened for Oklahoma. Where do we stand now, John?
So just a week ago, you looked at this team and what they had left on the schedule. They were only projected to win one of their final 5 games, that being Iowa State. The rest of them, the ESPN matchup predictor, using simulations to kind of run through this. They run 20,000 simulations based on new data every single week, and it comes up with new information, and that's how they come up with their projections. Now with Iowa, the win over Iowa State, Texas Tech getting beat by Baylor big, West Virginia again losing big, Oklahoma State getting blown out. The sands have shifted a little bit in Oklahoma's favor to where now they're projected to win 3 of their final 4 games from the ESPN matchup predictor. And this week against Baylor is still, looking at a Baylor win is they're the projected winner according to the ESPN matchup predictor. But then after that, right now, Oklahoma, has a win probability of 56.1% against West Virginia, a win probability of 57.7%. And that's up from a week ago that was 40.4% over Oklahoma State. And then now from 39.5% win probability against Texas Tech, that's up to 51.8%. So it's amazing how much that 2 touchdown win over Iowa State moved the computers. Like, it moved the needle with the computers so much that Oklahoma got 12 to 15 points in some cases in the matchup predictor in some of these matchups. So it's a computer. I mean, going into the season, Oklahoma was projected to win all but one of their games, that being the Red River Showdown against Texas. We've seen how that's kind of turned out, but it just provides a little bit of information, a little bit of interesting food for thought as you go into the final stretch of the season. Now, again, we've said it, every single game here is winnable. And Brent Venables said it himself. Every game is losable. Like, there's a chance they could lose every game. There's a chance they could win every game, just depending on how they play. That being said, it makes me feel pretty good about where they're at right now, in that things look positive for the Oklahoma Sooners as they head towards the end of the season.
It's good. And I do think, for me individually, the way I perceive now these final 4 games has shifted a little bit, though. I will ask this question to you. Why has this changed so much with the computers? You were predicted to beat Iowa State last week. you went out and did what the only game that the computers thought you were going to win. Yeah, you won it by a couple of scores, but I guess this is where the computer doesn't account for the fact that it was a 1-score game late and they threw it right into Danny Stutzman's stomach. And that's what made it a 2-score game when it was all said and done. Not to take, a bunch away from Oklahoma. I thought Oklahoma clearly made some defensive improvements that we were wanting to see coming out of the bye week. I guess for me, even everything around Oklahoma, okay, yeah, Baylor thumped Texas Tech. So that was surprising, right? I mean, after how well Texas Tech had played the week before and what they did to West Virginia, that percentage you would think probably should, tighten up some because they hung around with TCU. Now, Oklahoma State, obviously, that's the one to where you could see why that would pretty dramatically shift. But I don't know. I mean, you do what you're supposed to do, and I guess it's just the Oklahoma State loss. I mean, the way that they lost, or Texas Tech, the way that they lost, is the main reason West Virginia losing again, right? But actually playing better. I mean, West Virginia definitely played better than a week before. So I don't know. It's interesting that those projections have changed as much as they have. I'm not upset about it, though. It's good news for Oklahoma. And I would say that, kind of like I said, I think last week to you, John, it's this week versus Baylor to me that was always going to tell me more about how the rest of the season is going to play out. And if anything, last week, what Baylor did to Texas Tech only reaffirmed that for me.
We'll talk about Baylor in just a second, but I think the thing that is the biggest difference with Oklahoma's performance against Iowa State is what they did against the run. This was a run defense that came into that game allowing more than 200 rushing yards per game. Like, that's terrible. That is a terrible rushing yards allowed performance for Oklahoma. And they held them to 66 rushing yards, 2.4 yards per carry. So that to me is the biggest difference in what this defense did, is they stopped the run. Like, they hadn't been able to do that all season long. Now, they still struggled a bit in the passing game, but they were actually able to make some hay in one phase of their defense, and that's in stopping the run. We'll see how well that translates this week against Baylor, because Baylor is one of the best rushing teams in the country. They've got a great offensive line. They got a freshman that's playing really good football right now. So it's going to be another big test for them. But if they're able to slow them down a little bit, I think it kind of puts proof in the pudding about what they did against Iowa State and it translating to this game against Baylor. But yeah, I think so much of it is just based on some of the things that happen outside of Oklahoma's control. The game in Morgantown, it's going to be a huge test. They play so much better there offensively than they have on the road. Against Texas Tech, they only put up 10 points. The week before that, they beat Baylor 43-40. This past week, they put up 31 on TCU, and like you said, they hung around. So it's going to be interesting when Oklahoma does go to Morgantown to play West Virginia. I think they're going to get a good test, and it's going to be a strong offensive performance for the Mountaineers. This defense better be kind of up, better be ready to play. They better have their game ready, because they seem to play much better football when they're in their home confines.
Well, yeah, I mean, you hit on what, again, is going to be probably, at least defensively for Oklahoma, the big story this week versus Baylor is, can OU slow down Richard Reese, right? Can you do a good job defensively against the run again? Because you're right, Baylor as a team averages 201. Let's just round down, right? Let's not give them that 202nd yard. 200 rushing yards per game, right, is what Baylor averages. That's 24th nationally. And Richard Reese just this past weekend carried 36 times for $148 and 3 scores. So an area that obviously Iowa State was not good at, Oklahoma in an area that it's not been good at in rushing defense was good at, right? Okay, well, now you've played, you've had the good performance versus Iowa State, and now you get to play a team in Baylor again that's good in that category. So has there been legitimate progress made there? And if the answer, like you said, if the answer to that question is yes, then not only is Oklahoma going to win this week versus Baylor, that's going to bode well for Oklahoma, John, to win every game that's left on its schedule.
And we'll continue to talk a little bit about Baylor after I talk to you about SweatBlock. Hey, just because the weather is turning cooler doesn't mean you're not going to still deal with some excessive sweating issues if you deal with them. Indoors, it's getting warmer, it's getting drier, and sometimes you just got too many layers on. If you're going to holiday parties, you might have that big ugly Christmas sweater on, and it might cause you to sweat. If you deal with excessive sweating, then you might need to go check out SweatBlock. It's the doctor recommended, doctor created way to prevent excessive sweating and odor. Again, it's able to help anybody. If you got a friend or a loved one that is dealing with excessive sweating, they might need to check out SweatBlock, and they can go to sweatblock.com right now and get 20% off using our promo code Locked On. It's available on Amazon as well. So go to sweatblock.com, use our promo code Locked On to get 20% off. All right, Josh, a few more notes here on Baylor before we touch on a few recruiting nuggets as well. Would it surprise you to learn that Baylor is averaging 39 points per game and is 15th in the country in that realm? Now, 35 points per game in Big 12 play, which to me is still pretty surprising because I don't see them as an offense that's just lighting everybody up week to week.
Yes, it absolutely surprises me. Part of it is, I guess, the West Virginia game obviously helps. And this Texas Tech game obviously helps for Baylor. And then the Kansas game, you would be right on that conference number, right? But, to me, I'll tell you why it surprises me is Blake Shapen is someone that I was very, very high on coming into the season. And not that his numbers, just looking at the raw numbers for him, he's thrown for a little over 1,800 yards, 13 touchdowns versus 5 interceptions. So, the numbers themselves, not bad, but it's been roller coastery, right? It's been up and down with Blake Shapen. At no point this season have really, I kind of felt about Shapen that, this is one of the Big 12 best quarterbacks, right? And I don't think consistently Baylor's gotten those types of results from him. So with that in mind, yeah, I'm looking at the numbers this week. I'm surprised it's that good. I am.
Yeah, he's been okay. Like he's been kind of the bus driver a la Gary Bohannon, but hasn't necessarily provided the same rushing effort that Bohannon provided last year. And he's turning the ball over a little bit more. And so it's interesting. They're a Richard Reese team. Like it's Richard Reese and it's that offensive line that's really driving the bus for this team. This past week, Blake Shapen just completed 63.3% of his passes. He was 19 to 30 for 211 yards, averaging just 7 yards per attempt. A week ago against Kansas, only threw for 164 yards and a touchdown, had 2 interceptions. Against West Virginia, he had a big game, threw for 326 and 2 touchdowns. Against Oklahoma State, 345 and 2 touchdowns, but also threw 2 interceptions. So he's been very much a roller coaster. He's not necessarily driving the ball down the field all the time. So it's really fascinating to see. And now they did lose a guy like Tyquan Thornton to the NFL draft this past year. So they're breaking in some new skill talent as well. But against Blake Shapen, you're going to have a chance to make some hay as a defense. He's solid. He's good. He may not turn the ball over as much as Hunter Deckers does, but he might provide you some opportunities to take the ball away. I don't think he's going to be an overly aggressive player. So I don't think you're going to have to worry about him pushing the ball down the field on you so often. He's going to just kind of take what you give him. So if you give him something underneath, I think that's going to be what he takes. But yeah, it's all about slowing down Richard Reese and slowing down this running game because you want to make Blake Shapen play in second and long, third and long situations. That's just kind of what I've seen out of this at this point. Now he can definitely light you up if you give him openings. If you have some busted coverages, he'll make you pay for it. But I don't think he's going to be out there threading the needle, making these, pinpoint accurate passes and just, picking you apart if you're in zone coverage. Drop again, kind of like with Hunter Deckers, dropping guys in the zone. That's going to put a little bit more pressure on Shapen to really work through his progressions and find those soft spots. I don't know if he's going to be up to that quite yet.
One area that, could work out in favor in this game, again, would just love to see Oklahoma do this again, but Baylor has allowed 15 sacks, right? Which is kind of middle of the road, just about right smack dab in the middle of all college football. Actually very similar to Iowa State's numbers. Iowa State's tied 67th and Baylor's 61st in that category nationally. So that's one area too, to where with somebody like Shapen, John, that, at times has been really good throwing the football down the field, but other times it's kind of just been okay. He's also at times throughout the course of this season, teams have been able to get back there and beat this offensive line and get to him a little bit, right? Or he's not had the mobility to escape a little bit. So that could be an area to where maybe Oklahoma this week defensively can find a little bit of an edge.
Yep. And a few more, just a couple of things we want to touch on the recruiting side of things before we get out of here. And we'll continue to talk about Baylor as we get through the week. We're going to have our crossover with our guy, Drake Toll of Locked On Bears, Locked On Baylor. We'll have that this week. Sorry, that was a terrible promo, Drake. My bad. I know you're going to crush me for it at some point if you listen to the show. My apologies. But Drake, Toll, great coverage for Locked On Baylor. So if you're looking at figuring out what's going on with Baylor heading into this week, great show, Locked On Baylor. Check that out. Kaleb Spencer, 3-star linebacker commit for the Oklahoma Sooners, flips to Miami, seemingly kind of out of nowhere. From my perspective, it's surprising, but not all that surprising at the same time. So, Oklahoma got 3 linebackers, 4-star players in the 2022 recruiting class, and Jaren Kanak, Kobe McKenzie, and Kip Lewis. They've got 3 4-star linebackers, 2 of which are in the top 150 in the 2023 recruiting class. But you got Samuel Omasigo, Lewis Carter, and then Phil Picciotti as well. So 3 4-star linebackers in 2022, 3 in 2023. That's a pretty deep linebacker group as you start getting all these guys on campus. Based on star ratings alone, now I know that's not the be-all end-all. A lot of things change once you get on campus. As my former co-host David Walker used to say, the stars go away once you get on campus. It's all about what you do once you get there. That being said, a crowded linebacker room. So again, not all that terribly surprising. They've got some options. They're looking at Akana out of Utah, a 4-star player that probably projects as an edge or an outside linebacker type. Disappointing to lose a player. It always is. At the same time, I don't think it's going to hurt this recruiting class all that much when it's all said and done.
Yeah, you make a good point about some of the other guys that obviously Oklahoma has committed. I'm not going to sit here and say it's good at, by any stretch of the imagination when you lose somebody. I mean, while you've, obviously recruited well, it seems like, right? Jaren Kanak, I think everybody's, very, very positive about what his future could look like. He's already seen snaps. We'll see about both McKenzie and Kip Lewis. Obviously, the star ratings look good for those guys. And, this class looks good in that regard too. But man, the more guys you can have that are 6'3", 210, sure, bring them on down. But obviously, for him, if Miami's a better fit, then Miami's a better fit. The other piece of the recruiting puzzle, I know a bunch of people were holding out hope that maybe Kayden McDonald would make that Oklahoma decision. He followed where the crystal balls were indicating and committed to Ohio State if you missed it today. So that's, that was expected, right? I mean, the flip obviously was a surprise with Kaleb Spencer. Kayden McDonald, maybe you felt like you obviously had a puncher's chance because you were still in the mix, but kind of felt like the writing was on the wall with that one that he wasn't going to commit or come to Oklahoma.
Yeah, it just didn't seem like he was as much on the radar as some other interior defensive line players that we've been targeting. The bigger surprise on that was David Hicks. Like David Hicks, you felt like you were going to get. At worst, you felt like it was 50-50. Like Kate, with McDonald, it's like, okay, he's kind of included Oklahoma, but it didn't really seem like that was a real, like they had a legit shot at that one, at least from my perspective. So it happens. You're not going to win them all. It's not an indication as to whether or not Todd Bates is a good recruiter or not. Remember, people were killing DeMarco Murray just not that long ago for his supposed lack of ability to recruit, and then went out and got Gavin Sawchuk and Javante Barnes. And hey, I'm going to give him Rayleigh Brown as well. Like he got Rayleigh Brown committed to Oklahoma just because Lincoln Riley left. I mean, that's a pull. It's understandable. You don't want to lose that guy, but DeMarco Murray did a lot of the legwork on that one too and got him to commit. So, I mean, DeMarco Murray showed his recruiting chops. And then Todd Bates, he was the national, the recruiter of the year back, 2019, 2020, something like that. So let's not overreact to the idea that, yes, because you lost David Hicks, yes, because you lost Kayden McDonald, that he's not a good recruiter. Remember, you still got Derek LeBlanc coming. He and Miguel Chavis, they tag team these guys as well. You still got Colton Vasek, at least for the time being. You still got PJ Adebare as well. So this defensive front for the 2023 recruiting class is still a blue chip front. You'd like to see them maybe get another flip in there, get back into the David Hicks sweepstakes and see if you can get him turned back to Oklahoma at some point over the next few months. But again, don't sweat Todd Bates. Don't worry about it. He's a good recruiter. Oklahoma's defensive front is going to be fine. Brent Venables has proven time and time again that he knows what he's looking for in defensive linemen, and he knows how to get them to the NFL through the production at the college level. So no sweat. Josh, anything you want to say on that front?
I agree with you. I think that those guys are going to find those guys. I've made the remark in the past, though, and I know it's not going to sit well with at least one of our listeners. You got to show me that you're getting Kayden McDonald, though, right? I mean, flip David Hicks at some point. This is the kind of guy. It's not Kaleb Spencer. It's Kayden McDonald that Oklahoma needs. They got to find somebody that's 6'3", 310 that can go be that blue chip defensive tackle piece that Oklahoma has just flat out been missing for the last decade plus. So this one hurts a little bit, even though I don't think that Oklahoma, though they were here with, Clemson, Florida, Michigan, whoever, right? Ohio State, obviously, where he's committed, didn't feel like Oklahoma was as much as in the mix as those other schools. And obviously he picks Ohio State. This is the type of player, though, that, Todd Bates and company, they got to find a way to, going forward, get this kind of guy. Because, look, this is somebody from Sewanee, Georgia, that's going to Ohio State. So you could have gotten this kid.
Yeah, and you're right. They got to find a way to get those big interior defensive line pieces to really fortify that defensive front. And I think they will at some point. I think it's going to come. It just may take time to really get that figured out, but I think it's going to happen at some point. So that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for making Locked On Sooners your first listen. Now go check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast with our guy, Peter Bukowski, bringing you all of the latest in the top stories from the sporting world in under 20 minutes. Locked On Sports Today, available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. But until next time, he's Josh Helmer. I'm John Williams. We'll catch you then. Boomer Sooner.